Okay, so this is the Public Service Commission's RM 83 rulemaking. Let me have the parties that are going to actively participate in this maybe come to the table. So that way we can, instead of people jumping up and down. So. And why don't we take appearances, at least to start.
Good morning, Your Honor. Beverly Sikora on behalf of BGE. I also have John Frayne with me and Jennifer Karras.
Good morning, Your Honor. Brock Miller on behalf of the Office of People's Counsel.
Actually, let me,
Good morning, Your Honor. Peter Wilson on behalf of staff and Phil Vanderade.
Okay.
And Your Honor.
And Mr. Hoppick is on the
Right.
video.
Oh,
Yeah. Good morning once again. Matthew Seeger is appearing for Pepco and Delmarva Power, but the BGE will largely be a laboring order today. Thank you.
And anybody here for Potomac Edison?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Dan Garcia with Potomac Edison.
And anybody here for SMICO? Okay, all right. So let me turn it over to the work group leader, Brent Sproul.
Great, can everyone hear me?
You might want to speak a little louder or turn up the volume or something.
Screen.
Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. Is this a little bit better?
Yeah, that works. Yeah.
Perfect. Great. So I'll probably start by sharing my screen, but good morning, Chair and Commissioners and all of the other parties. So this morning is for rulemaking 83 or RM 83, which I'll probably be referring to. But if it's okay with you, Chair and Commissioners, I was going to go ahead and start by providing a brief overview of the proposed regulations that are in front of you all this morning, and then also provide a short background of the genesis of how we got to these the proposed regulations. If that's okay with you, I'll probably run through that.
Sure, go ahead.
Great. So I wanted to start by kind of explaining what the regulations are in front of you all today. So previously, the Commission issued Order 90673, which directed the PC44 Time of Use Rate Design Work Group to draft proposed regulations to address a statutory disagreement. And I will hit on that statutory disagreement in a little bit, kind of going through the background of this issue. So the work group drafted and developed these proposed regulations, and then Commission Order 91080 directed the work group to file these draft regulations for a rulemaking. So I believe there are two main goals for the proposed regulations that these regulations seek to solve, which is one, to ensure that there's no legal disagreement on the conducting of billing for time of use customers that are also net energy metering customers. And then also, as there currently is a halt on new net metering customers and their participation in time of use rates, and allowing these regulations would move forward with utilities being able to adopt tariff revisions to allow new net metering customers to participate in time of use rates. So with that, the proposed regulations are pretty short and sweet in that there are three main changes. So one defines what a time varying rate is for sake of the utilities billing practice. The second change describes how the utility will calculate net energy for a customer participating in a time varying rate. And then the third change describes how a utility will calculate the net excess generation for a customer participating in a time varying rate. So that's the brief overview. And before we get started, I do want to provide some background, just because this issue and the genesis of where we are kind of takes its place all the way back in 2022, which was before my time as the work group leader of this work group. But just a brief rundown. So, on June 3rd, 2022, the TOU work group issued and filed a report, and this report recommended the expansion of time of use rates and the pilot time of use rate, but also highlighted that there were differing views of work group parties on how compensation by time of use period should be calculated for net metering customers. And this is in relation to a statutory disagreement that was had. And specifically, that statutory disagreement is that the net metering statute prohibits a collection of any charges other than a customer charge in a month where a customer is a net generator. And the current practice and how the billing practice has always been for customers is that there is a scenario where a customer can be a net generator during off-peak periods, a net consumer during on-peak periods, and an overall net generator when combining both those periods. And in this example, this customer could receive a volumetric rate for their net consumption despite being an overall net generator in a given month. So this was the statutory concern that was raised in the 2022 work group report. Soon thereafter, a commission order was issued which directed the work group to basically study this statutory concern, identify customers that are impacted, how they are impacted, discuss alternative approaches to billing methods. And additionally, in this July 2022 commission order, the commission halted new net metering customers from participating in time of use rates, and that exists up until this day. So fast forward in March 2023, so a little bit over a year ago, the work group issued and filed a report and presented the study that was conducted by the utilities on the billing issue. This study ultimately concluded that this issue exists and compared the utilities' current billing practice to a alternative approach that the work group had discussed for comparison purposes. So ultimately, this work group report basically provided the study and then requested commission determination on the statutory concern, on whether the statutory concern could be addressed through regulations or through some other method. So in June of 2023, the commission issued another order which stated that the issues should be resolved through a rulemaking that recognizes that what the utilities are doing for their billing practice falls under a standard metering practice for how they're calculating on and off peak consumption and generation. So with that, following this commission order, the PC 44 TOU work group worked diligently to develop these regulations. We met and discussed these proposed regulations to address and basically enshrine the utilities' current billing practice for time of use rates. And then filed a report these draft regulations back in September of 2023. And fast forward once again to March of this past year, the commission issued a order which directed the time of use work group to submit the proposed regulations for consideration in a rulemaking proceeding. So that is a brief background on where we are and how we got to this point, starting all the way back from 2022 up until now with this this current rulemaking. So I wanted to open up with that background and overview of the regulations. And Chair and Commissioners, I guess I would recommend or welcome the parties to provide maybe initial or opening comments on this. So.
Okay, before we turn to that, any questions for Mr. Sproul based on his, Commissioner Richard?
Yes, excuse me, Mr. Sproul, just a couple of questions. I'm just wanted to make sure I understand kind of where we are since order number 9673 in those findings. Since that order, are net metering customers now once again being allowed to participate in time of use programs? Have we
so
corrected that?
as
Because
of
we,
right now,
I'm
the
sorry.
halt for time
Wait,
of use
I'm sorry, could you,
Could you start again?
I apologize, I spoke over you, so please go ahead.
Yeah, so as of right now, there is a halt, and net metering customers are still barred from participating in the time of use rate that is at question here, and that exists within the tariff. It's explicit in the utilities time of use tariffs, meaning that from October 2022, net metering customers are not allowed to participate in time of use rates.
Okay, so the order number 9673, I thought that was the latest order, and that's where we stated that we believe that there was no prohibition. So that did not undo the previous order, which I guess
And-
halted the enrollment of those time net metering customers.
And the idea, and this was discussed in the work group regarding the tariff revisions after the 9673 order, and it was discussed within the work group, and the work group decided that it would be best practice to allow for the regulations to be approved first before filing tariff revisions to move forward with allowing net metering customers participating in time of use rates, just for sake of ensuring that the tariff complies with the regulations, if that makes sense, Commissioner.
It does. Obviously, I'm disappointed. I thought that we were trying to move expeditiously to allow, once again, net metering customers to participate in time of use. So we continue to have stalled, I guess, on that front at this point, even despite the finding in the order that there should be no prohibition.
And Commissioner, I think one of the ideas, and I know I have discussed this with the utilities in the work group, is that following these the potential adoption of these regulations, the utilities will then move on filing tariff revisions to ensure that net metering customers can participate in time of use rates, just because now the billing practice for those NEM customers will be enshrined in the COMAR regulations.
Okay, so until there is a regulation, we will not get that tariff change, and so we are still months away from allowing. Okay, that comes as a surprise to me. All right, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, so let me turn to the parties to make offer any comments they have on the proposed rulemaking. And let me go from right to left, so I'm going to start with staff first. So.
Good morning, Chair Hoover and Commissioners. Thank you on behalf of technical staff for the opportunity to present our concerns. I am Philip Vanderhayden. I'm representing technical staff. I'm also the net metering working group leader and can answer questions you may have regarding that activity as well. With me is Mr. Peter Wilson, our Deputy Staff Counsel. Mr. David Hoppick is here via WebEx if you have questions of them at some point. Staff has filed comments on April 21st recommending deferral of the adoption of these proposed regulations. We stand by those comments. Our concerns are practical in nature. We are concerned that the proposed regulations would discourage net energy metering NEM customers from participating in load shifting via PC44 TOU schedules because it would be a reduction in the value of their net metering equipment, their asset, and potentially that of their community solar subscription. Our concerns regarding the legacy time of use rates do not rise to the same level, but these regulations would apply to both of those types of schedules. Staff would like the working groups to consider ways, unlike what you have in front of you, that would allow customers an opportunity to participate in load shifting of their load to off-peak times while keeping the ability to cost-effectively use net metering and community solar to reduce their bills and offset their usage. In addition to practical concerns, there are legal issues, as noted in our comments. The law requires NEM and community solar to accrue excess generation in the same manner, following direction in what's written in the NEM law in 7-306. Staff sees NEM, net energy metering, and aggregate net energy metering and community solar as all forms of net metering, and in other policies, those are treated identically for the purpose of calculating credits, where they all use the full retail price. They determine the maximum permitted amounts, all of which are limited to 200% of a customer's historic usage, and they are all subject to the statewide capacity under the 3,000 megawatt cap. Both NEM and CS methods, you can have rooftop solar and community solar on a single account, and there will be a need to sort of make sure that those two policies are handled in a similar fashion so that customers don't have a disadvantage one versus the other. You will note that community solar is here in Maryland as a means of allowing customers that don't have a rooftop because they rent or they have a shaded area, they can't do net metering. That's why community solar is there. That's one of the primary policy reasons we see both of those should be treated equally when it comes to valuing their output. And it's our understanding that that is not how these rules would necessarily play out. Although the time use working group was able to report a consensus among the members of the net metering working group, it's clear there are still some issues, as you can see by the comments filed by the various solar organizations. Not the least of those is a means to allow customers that are using net energy metering or community solar to also be willing to participate in load shifting and get those effects. Customers that invest in renewable energy, that are interested in community solar or have put solar panels on their roof, those are very likely the same type of customers that are going to want to do the things to shift their loads in order to improve their energy efficiency and improve their impact on the energy grid. The rules you have in front of you would appear to cause a problem in that if one tried to do load shifting while you're on the existing net metering tariffs, you would lose the value of it in a way that probably wouldn't make it cost effective financially for you to do that. Staff has not identified a particular policy reason for the electric companies to oppose our suggestion to review this. So we're not entirely sure if there's something other than an obstacle to a need to reprogram billing systems from the existing measures which the proposed regulations you have in front of you would allow to continue. But ultimately, if there's an agreement in the working group, it would have to have some consideration of the fact that there would be some need to change the way those billing systems are operating now so that customers could do both of these programs and still have a net benefit to them, a positive benefit. So staff has proposed two alternative methods, and we see that the comments from the solar industry has produced a similar but a third, and we think there's a benefit in reviewing those methods, specifically modeling how they would affect a typical net metering customer that then chose to alter their usage behavior and shift loads using the time of use rates. So we have, in the net metering working group, we have scoped our summer plans for dealing with the consolidated billing. You will see us next Wednesday for rulemaking on implementing the permanent community solar program, but we have more work to do to implement consolidated billing and a few other miscellaneous items. This is an item that is on our scope to address so that time of use for community solar will be clear and what those rules allow. So I think it would be beneficial to allow a joint consideration of both the time of use for NEM, for rooftop solar, and for community solar at the same time, and there's some benefit to doing that. I anticipate that there's an opportunity to collaborate there, not only for time of use for NEM, but also for aggregate net metering, which may or may not be affected directly by these regulations. And we believe that by putting all of these together, considering them equally and hearing not just from the stakeholders that were in the time of use working group, but where you have the full attention of the folks involved in community solar and net energy metering, that will provide a more rounded policy that will be beneficial statewide to get both load shifting from time of use rates and the use of renewable energy in distributed systems to work and harmonize together. Thank you for the opportunity. Those comments were available for questions.
Okay, so Mr. Hoppick, do you have anything to add? Okay, fair enough. So questions for staff from commissioners. Commissioner Sushman.
Good morning, Mr. Vanderhayden. There are sort of two policies in play here, and it seems to me that both can be in play. And the concern I have with your proposal is you take one off the table. So I mean, there's no question that we're trying to encourage solar development. As much solar as we can would be great. At the same time, we recognize the challenges of constraints on the grid, and time of use is a way to manage the peak periods so that you don't overbuild, and then impose those costs on ratepayers. And so it seems to me that the proposal that has been offered by the utilities sort of addresses that, recognizes that you can walk and chew gum at the same time. You can deploy solar on your roof, but you can also encourage the use of that solar in a way that is beneficial to the grid. So, for example, maybe a customer would be on a time of use rate schedule would be encouraged to use their solar during the day to run the dishwasher, run their washing machine, and then not run those appliances in the peak period where that power can then be used by the system to avoid having to build out transmission and so or distribution. So I'm concerned about as I read your proposal, it sort of takes time of use off the table because it sort of gives value both to power that's being sold or sent to the grid during the peak period and the off-peak period. Now, maybe I'm misinterpreting what you're proposing, but to the extent that you diminish the time of use aspect of it, then you take away an opportunity. And so maybe if maybe I'm not understanding what the proposal is, and maybe you can better explain that to me.
I will try because I think what we're advocating might be the exact opposite of what you described.
Okay.
We are trying to create a scenario where if you have rooftop solar on your roof at present or thinking about putting it on, that you would look at the schedules for time of use and say, hey, I can still participate and I won't lose the value of the $30,000 I spent on my solar panels. Right. What you have in front of you, if you try to do both at the same time, and think about the fact that the off-peak rates, the off-peak periods in the winter are mostly during the daylight hours. The on-peak in the winter I'm talking specifically about the time of use for PC44, which is the programs that you're proposing to expand further. That's 6 to 9 a.m., which is typically in the winter months, not when you have the sun shining. So a customer would find most, if not the majority of, or all of it, perhaps, in some months, all of their solar production would occur off-peak. And if you had solar panels and you were all on a standard rate, you understood fully how this was going to play out, you would look at that and say, you know what, I'm going to lose the value of all that generation because the off-peak rates for distribution are like a fifth of what the on-peak rates are.
Well, then you may opt for a battery. And then so I'm concerned that I understand what you're saying, and a customer coming in would say, if I were a NEM customer and a time of use customer, I'm not getting the full value. But we do have a need for time of use, and I've talked about this before, and the cost of building out. I mean, we're looking at a $5 billion bill from PJM, and that's going to have an impact on affordability. And I'm so concerned about that. And so I don't want to lose the value of time of use. And so it may be for that customer doing solar and battery would address it. I'm not. I guess I'm not hearing from you how we're going to have a robust solar and time of use program if you basically flatten the value of the sale to the grid. If it's all the same, then you don't have time of use rates. I mean,
Let me try one more time. Sorry, I'm doing a terrible job of explaining what.
Well, or maybe I'm just not hearing.
The customer, you want more customers. This is, time of use is optional until it becomes mandatory, if that ever happens. It's optional. So you have customers out there, you want to entice them. Say, hey, try this. You can save money and you'll be helping the grid if you do it. You'll be reducing on-peak energy. So how can you do that? Well, right now, solar everywhere where net metering is used on a standard rate is, and I'm going to use like roughly the 18 or 19 cent full retail rate of electricity. For a residential customer, it's somewhere right below 20 cents at the moment if you total up SOS, distribution, transmission. You value that energy at 20 cents or so. That's what they're getting right now for that energy whenever it's produced, and that's all net metering, including wind, although most of it is solar. That's produced during the day, mostly between the hours of like 8 a.m. with full power coming on around 10 and extending until 2 p.m. in the afternoon. All of which is during the off-peak hours. If you tell the customer, look, we're not changing the value you get for your energy. And from what we understand, community solar, the way it's being practiced right now, that will not change for those customers because they're not applying the time use periods to community solar production for the purpose of valuing. Which if you go ahead with that, you're going to make community solar much more valuable to a TOU customer. But all I'm saying is value the production from the rooftop or from the community solar array at an amount that does not change, that is not the on-peak rate, and is not the off-peak rate, but either something in between those two, or perhaps more simply just apply the rate that standard customers would get for their production.
Okay, so explain to me how that is not applying time of use.
So you're not applying the time of use to their production. You're applying time of use, and you may need a dual register meter. You may need 2 meters to do this. You're applying their usage will pay time of use rates. Their production, as proposed, would be valued at the rate of either the standard rate or something that is distinct from the on-peak and the off-peak rate. So, in other words, everything is produced from their solar, wherever it comes from, would be valued at, say, 20 cents kilowatt hour.
Okay, and you think an average customer, that seems, I'm struggling to understand what you're proposing. Seems unbelievably complicated. I think an average customer would not understand any of that.
That's something that, always is a problem when we're dealing with some of these issues. But I guess what I'm saying is if you have a customer that's on standard rates
then
now,
we're not doing our job. Mr. Vanderheyden, we need to find an approach that everybody can understand. That is kind of workable. That makes sense. I understand your concern about discouraging deployment of solar, but having sort of, the dual meter, I'm not sure the customer's going to want to spend money for an extra meter, and I don't think the utilities are going to give the customer an extra meter. But having so it sounds like you're suggesting 2 different rate structures, one charging usage and one just dealing with, I know for the larger entities, they do have dual meters, so keeping track of what goes in and out, that seems to be overly complicated and really expensive, and I think that would serve to discourage.
it's the only thing I could think of without having the benefit of getting into it with a technical group like the net metering working group to actually say, well, what sort of metering is out there? What are the costs going to be? How would this work? But I guess anticipating that if you have a customer who is using rooftop solar now and they understand what this proposed regulation would do, and their production gets valued at off-peak and on-peak based on when those time periods are, they should understand that they really don't want to do that if they ever want to get their money back for the plant they put. So that it takes that customer off the market for time of use.
Well, but the other thing it does is it disconnects the customer from usage of their generation. I mean, then they're not even paying attention. So it could whatever's being generated is just getting thrown to the grid, and don't you think that we want to have customers think about how they're using their energy, and that they should want to use more of their energy off peak? That seems to actually be the flip of what we'd want. We really want, I mean, that's time of use is price signals, and we really, and that's that's behavioral, and we want customers to respond to the to what they do based on the prices that are what they're seeing, and so then we lose all the value of why we're doing time of use pricing in the first place.
Your Honor, I don't want to argue that point. It's an excellent point. It would be, I think, fantastic if customers that got the benefit of selling energy, back to the grid from solar panels had to say, say you gotta be honest, that you're producing during the day, it's only worth this much. We can't give you 18 cents kilowatt hour for, we can only give you 4 cents kilowatt hour. I'm going to make a decision if I'm a customer saying, well, if I can only get that kind of money for it, I'm not going to spend $30,000 to put this on my roof. So it's almost like they have to choose which of these two policies you want them to sort of experiment with, try, or fit to their schedule. One of the things that I think a study of this might help to do is like how much load can they actually shift? Like if you have a customer that has solar panels and they've got electric heat, they got a heat pump doing all the other things we want, can they shift if their load in the winter months such that like net all of it, it's better for them by shifting load using time of use rates than they would have been had they just say, I'm going to stay on the standard schedule.
Time of use is not a new thing. It's been, I mean, I cut my teeth on PURPA when they were promoting time of use. So time of use has been around a long time. I don't see, to Commissioner Richards' point, I mean, I just feel like we're slow walking now at this point. I don't think we need studies. I don't think especially on time of use. I think the jury's out on that. It's been 40 years. And I think people sort of accept the fact that, or at least I do, that time of use rates are a good thing because they tell people when it's better for the system to not be using power. And for that if you're talking about that 4 cent, that incentive should be, they shouldn't be thinking, oh, I shouldn't be selling it to the grid. They should be thinking, oh, I should use that power now because I'm going to get better rates in the peak period, and that's going to help the system as well. So anyway, I'm looking forward to hearing what others have to say.
Okay, Commissioner Richard?
No question at this time, but I am concerned that we're getting into a lot of detail about time of use when there are multiple time of use rates out there. So the fact that we're trying to zero into something that we don't even know what we're necessarily trying to make available to net metering customers, I think that's beyond the scope of this hearing today. I think today we were simply trying to come in and put into regulations our finding as a commission that net metering customers do have a right to participate in time of use rates, and that there is a standard metering practice generally found around the country, and what the utilities are proposing today meets that. And so again, I hope we're not going to go too broadly into what we're trying to do and just take care of the problem at hand, and that is let's allow net metering customers to participate in time of use rates, whatever that right might look like, and and then let's just follow what all the other states are doing, all the other states that are in similar situations as Maryland, and not try to get too exotic in this whole process. So I'm sorry, I'm just frustrated that we're potentially going to delay this yet again. So,
Commissioner Barbe?
Well, at the risk of getting more exotic, I've always prided myself in the ability to holistically understand economic dynamic, and I don't in this instance. Here's the way I look at this, and please let me know two things. Number one, if you think I'm correct, and number two, if you've done it this way. As far as I'm concerned, there are going to be 4 types of electric consumers in the future. The ones who don't have solar or batteries, the ones who have rooftop solar, the ones who have batteries and the ones who have both rooftop solar and batteries. So every residential electric user is going to fall into one of those 4 buckets. So, question number 1, is that a correct way of looking at the market in the future? And question number 2, has your reasoning along the lines of this endeavor looked at it that way?
So, Your Honor, I think you've got it pretty good with the 4 types. I think there's a 5th. I think the customer that just disconnects from the grid because they can live entirely on their solar generation, their batteries, and whatever else.
Well, we don't have to worry about them because
Well,
they don't care about time of use.
You would have to worry about it because the other thing is folks are talking about batteries. Batteries are still relatively expensive.
Oh, yeah, even at
They-
the utility scale.
The existing technology requires them to be, they only have so many cycles of charge and discharge. In this case, we'd be talking about using those kind of batteries every day in a way that I don't know if we have good data on how long those batteries will last. So when you figure in, I have to, buy a Tesla Powerwall or something similar, when I'm paying dollars per kilowatt hour life cycle, you add that in, which is what anyone who's buying one of those things is probably going to want to do. You might not find that batteries are a good solution to sort of shifting your load and using the batteries to do what the distribution grid is sort of doing virtually through this form of net metering. So there are folks that can afford batteries. Those are probably the same folks who can afford, ground source heat pumps and solar panels on their home and that sort of thing.
They're the same people, yeah.
But the economic strata might, force those groups into people with capital, with money, or the ability to finance it will be in, the type with batteries and solar.
So
And then-
I'm getting the distinct impression that you really haven't looked at all those variables in the course of your work. You've really only focused on people who have rooftop or community solar versus those who don't.
Well, we don't even have a law that says you can use batteries to net meter. Like, that's not addressed. They didn't say, hey, you can, I could net meter by putting one solar panel on my house, a whole bunch of big batteries, charge up overnight, and then discharge into the grid. Is that renewable energy because I stored it? Or is it, are we counting just what I produced? So batteries is, I think, untouched in our regulations, and I'm not sure the law got to that for net metering. It is not an area that is allowable for net metering. So battery storage and net metering is a complicated thing. We have not studied that because we don't really have a mandate to do it. It would be great and very interesting to understand how all that works, but that is not possible really because it's not even clear that we can do net metering if the output is coming from a battery mixed in with coming from one of the eligible forms of generation.
Well, I have a good friend who's a member of the legislature, and he has a Tesla Powerwall, and he has solar on his roof. And I know that he's very aware of like me, he's a total geek on this. He is very aware of what the source of the electrons he's using are. He's aware if it comes from the grid, it comes from his roof, or it comes from his battery. But we don't. Let me just say this out loud so that we're very clear about this. We don't currently have a mechanism for being able to parse out where those electrons came from for a customer. So we don't physically have the ability to say you can have net metering for the electrons you get off the grid, but not for the ones you generated.
I mean, you could separately meter each of those and determine that, from a calculation if you could. I mean, the technology is probably something that already exists for folks that are using.
That
those-
also wouldn't be
those.
cheap though, right?
I mean, compared to the cost of the batteries themselves, the metering components might actually be not that significant. We do know, I mean, and I don't think we've tried to study this, but Tesla has experiments maybe in California where they're using sort of that virtual power plant approach. So they're doing something of that nature. We just don't have the wherewithal to, I mean, it's being done. I'm sure there are people out there who are net metering and have Tesla Powerwalls, but would they actually be attempting to discharge their Powerwalls, and reduce the life, and those things aren't cheap, by feeding the grid power every day? I don't know, but this type of program might encourage people to do that, but it's pretty limited, and you would have to have a fair amount of money in order to do it.
One other thing, one last thing. You basically take the philosophy that community solar and rooftop solar should be treated equally in all these calculations. I presume, why is that actually? I don't presume to know.
Well, I think there are a couple of examples where they are treated equally under other, they're valued the same, and as we mentioned, customers, they're subject to the same load. But the underlying policy for community solar, the reason we do that is so that folks that can't afford panels on their roof, don't have a roof because they're renters or just don't have a roof, or have trees that they don't want to chop down, they couldn't participate in net metering. That was perceived as a benefit, although you still have to come up with the money to put the panels on your roof. So it's sort of it's an opportunity to invest.
So you don't take into account at all in your calculations the fact that community solar is just a much cheaper way to generate solar electrons than residential rooftop solar. That doesn't come into your calculations.
It's not cheaper; it's more expensive.
Community solar is
absolutely, Your Honor. If I have a community solar subscription, I save 10% at best.
No, I'm talking about the actual physical ability of community solar, which has economies of scale to produce electricity more cheaply than something like residential rooftop, which by definition has no economy of scale.
Well, I'm sorry, I don't understand. Cheaply to the customer?
To the grid.
Because a customer, if I put solar on my roof, if I stay in that house for 25 years or at least the 10 years until it's paid off, ultimately you can look at your life cycle cost as being perhaps half, and you have the benefit of it locks at the price you paid for that solar.
Well, Mr. Vanderheyden, have you seen any of the cost charts that are put out by Lazard.com or the Department of the Energy? The department, most of the cost charts show a dramatically higher cost for residential rooftop solar than commercial and industrial rooftop solar or community solar.
I understand. It's. I think everybody knows that when you're building on a field, you don't have to deal with building codes, the roof strengths, that sort of thing. Plus, 2 to 5 megawatts at a shot is got to be cheaper economy of scale. Those costs are production costs, perhaps. Those don't get reflected back to we're talking about ratepayers, I think, about the costs. Ratepayers make a $30,000 investment and probably save $15,000 over 25 years on their electric bill. Plus, that cost to them locks unless, there's a lot of maintenance on those solar panels. Community solar is going to escalate with the price of electricity because all of the contracts are based on a percentage off, which is 10%. So the benefit of community solar accrues to the investor in community solar, as does the benefit of rooftop solar accrues to the investor, which also happens to be the customer. So, yes, I understand. Societal-wise, if you want more solar, community solar is probably a cheaper way to do it. At the same time, the investor's return on that is an element of that return that sort of is entirely outside of what we consider as ratepayer impacts. We are focusing, I think, on ratepayer impacts here with these regs, and I'm just anticipating that a customer that is doing net metering who switches to time of use under this new set of regulations, if they haven't done that before and aren't prepared, they're going to say, hey, why am I paying a bill? Why is my savings are much less? And there's going to have to be a lot of customer education on the part of the utilities when they put the customers into these rate classes to make sure they understand what they're doing. Because I really think that most folks, if they understand what the impact is and they don't have a battery, they're going to have less value from the rooftop. So that's certainly your call to make that policy going forward. There's lots of arguments that this is much closer to cost causation and that sort of thing. But ultimately, we have 3,000 megawatts of solar to build in Maryland, and for the folks that aren't using time of use rates, that value is going to be equal to the full retail rate for their customer class. And you might sort of change the dynamic of how folks are going to want to move there. Quite possibly, this is a way to sort of force more of that development to community solar rather than rooftop solar. But at the same time, the customer, they certainly don't have to do time of use. They can just stay with their regular schedule and they'll be fine. No harm at all for them. But you lose the opportunity to take that sort of environmentally focused person and get them on board with load shifting. Because, they'll just, if it's really about the money for them, or simply because it has to be about the money for them, they would probably not want to do this. And so you're just taking them out of the equation by not giving them a different value. That's really the harm. We just thought it was important to sort of bring that to the attention of the commission for this. We will have to address this issue for community solar. Possibly that policy would be different. It sort of depends on how one interprets the portion of the law that addresses this particular issue. You've heard from the solar folks, who apparently are not here today, to give you their point of view on it. But I think there's an opportunity to work a policy here that harmonizes the two of these together. It may be very difficult to explain to customers like how all this plays out. But if we go forward the way it is, I think we're losing an opportunity to get some very enthusiastic people to try this and maybe stick with it.
So, you talked a few minutes ago about you were going to be coming before us in the near future with regulations to implement the community solar program. So I guess I want to try and get a sense of, when you're saying delay the consideration of these, how long a delay are we talking about?
Well, it won't be any later than the end of this year, because we have an obligation in the statute to get consolidated billing done. The current, which I think is a little bit optimistic, game plan is to deal with the consolidated billing and the remaining community solar issues with a potential filing in August. I kind of think we're going to run into some policy things we're going to need to sort out, and it might not go that quickly. But much in the same way that we have to adopt the regulations for the permanent program by the end of 2025, the law requires adoption of regulations for consolidated billing, I believe, by July of 25. I'm sorry, end of 24 for the permanent program. I misspoke. End of this year, December. And by July 1 of 25, 6 months after that, we have to have regulations in place for community
Yeah, I
solar's
think you're right.
consolidated billing. So we are talking about incorporating some of those miscellaneous issues, if not all of them, in that second rulemaking, which we've already scoped it out, and we're planning to start meetings on that in June.
All right. So the concern I have is this. I mean, I'm the person who winds up asking for this extra time to implement things, because quite honestly, the attitude of Commissioner Barbay's, former colleagues is, the sooner the better with all these things. And it's quite a struggle to sort of try to add in time, even though these things are complicated. And part of that's because, there's pressure from the solar industry on the legislature to try and increase what's going on, because the solar industry is kind of a success story here in the state of Maryland. But it's also, I think, they're hearing from their constituents that are interested in this. And I frankly admit that there are, at least a couple of pots of customers, those who interact with the grid by flipping a switch and paying the bill, and that's the end of it. And then these others who are much more into it, the people that put panels on their roof and explore all these other options. And I think for them, the education level may not be all that difficult, because they're already sort of into this. They're not hobbyists, but they're, motivated enough for various reasons: environmental policy, savings, or just trying to be self-sufficient. And so I think they on their own are doing their own education on it. So I have a problem of us constantly, kind of slow walking things. And I think you've heard that from other people up here, and frustrating the folks that kind of want to do this by, being overly parental, I guess, when it comes to dealing with this. So I guess I'm trying to figure out, if there is a way to, if we go your route and delay consideration of these regulations today, how we can, try and expedite the process so that we can get this program up and running, because there is a lot of interest in this, not only from the people that are in the business of selling these products, but I also think that for a large segment of the customers who want to take advantage of this, and so I'm concerned that our constant, working through this is we're going to lose a lot of opportunity.
We can, I have a set of regs sitting here that implement the two suggestions that staff came up with. We could, those could be filed and you could schedule a meeting specifically. But I think the policy call that you have to make here is sort of what I was talking with Commissioner Suchman about. Should a customer that does time of use and benefits from load shifting to save money, should they also be compelled so that their solar output gets measured at the same rates at the same times? Or should we allow those two things to be distinct? I mean, I think that's sort of one policy that if you said, hey, we want to value, like if you benefit from time of use savings, your energy gets valued the same way. And it's not the same as what everybody else gets. And so think about that before you do this. That's one approach. And like to make that policy call, maybe you do need to understand, like, is that going to be sufficient for a number of customers to, yeah, we're going to do it anyway, or no, I'm not going to do it. Or you would reach a scenario where the energy generated from distributed solar, if not all distributed net metering, including things like wind, gets valued at a particular rate, statewide, and it's just as an example, the retail rate that's available 24 hours a day to customers on standard schedules. And so we're going to tell you want to benefit from load shifting, you actually have to shift load. We're not going to change the way you value your output. That's a policy call. If you make that policy call, then the regs in front of you, I think, go with the energy produced is valued at the same time when you're using the energy, and if you consider the other alternatives, it values the production of energy at a different rate that may be the same or different as the standard rate folks get, or some average of the on and off peak or whatever. If you go with those policies, I think then the path forward is more clear. Right now you have a regulation that picks one, and you don't have anything in front of you that offers an opportunity to pick the other approach, which would value the production differently than the usage. So it's kind of make the policy call, and I think we can move ahead.
Okay. All right. Well, let me hear from the other folks. So why don't we start with OPC?
Good morning again, Brock Miller on behalf of the Office of People's Counsel. As our short comments that we filed illustrate, OPC took a rather straightforward view of these proposed COMA revisions. Order 90673 was used by the Commission to direct the work group to draft regulations that clarify standard metering practices to allow TOU rates and the separate calculation of on and off peak generation and consumption. For nearly a year, the work group evaluated and discussed the proposed regulations and came, in OPC's understanding, to a set of consensus regulations that achieve the goal ordered by the Commission in that order. Those are the proposed COMA revisions that are the subject of this rulemaking. Because these regulations achieve the directives in Order 90673, OPC does not oppose them. I don't have much more to say, but I'm available for questions. Thank you.
Okay. Any questions for Commissioner Suchman?
So, Mr. Miller, you were part of the consensus process.
I joined later, but yes, I
Okay.
was part of the work group.
And your understanding was that what's before us was a consensus approach.
That's correct, Commissioner.
Okay, and it was your understanding at the time that the consensus approach was proposed that staff was part of the consensus?
From my understanding, yes.
Okay, and then were you surprised when you saw a filing from staff that they were not part of consensus?
To be candid, yes, I was.
Okay, that's all I have.
Any other questions? Okay. I understood from the other folks that you're, quote, speaking for the utilities, so.
We are speaking for the Exelon utilities.
Okay.
I'm not speaking on behalf of any other utilities.
Okay, all right, fine. Okay.
So, good morning, Commissioners. Actually, a lot of the points I was going to raise have already been raised by the Commissioners, but I will say that I share the frustration that Commissioner Richard expressed. This has been an ongoing process, and frankly, we thought that our regulations were simply codifying the policy decision that the commission made in order number 90673. We had done an analysis of, if you recall, we had a pilot with time of use rates. There were net energy metering customers that participated. We analyzed their usage. They actually did better than the non-net energy metering customers. We looked at a bunch of other things, and the commission decided that what we had proposed was the policy that it was going to go forth with. There was actually some draft regulations attached to 90673 kind of as a starting point, and what we later, agreed upon in the work group was pretty close. There were some tweaks. I'll also say that we did talk with the net metering work group. We talked with them about these regulations. As saying with Mr. Miller, we were, shocked when we saw staff's comments last week. This was the first we were hearing about this. I'll just say too, staff has raised another legal issue about community solar. That somehow that is a legal impediment to these regulations. Community solar is a very different animal than normal net metering, rooftop. It's virtual. We don't have the same level of time of use detail for the community solar, customer versus the generation. So we can't treat them exactly the same. So I think to start throwing community solar into this as an impediment is somewhat of a red herring, as a reason for further delay. I'll admit I'm focusing on the legal issues. I think Mr. Frayne and Ms. Karras perhaps have a few additional comments to make, as to kind of why the commission's decision in 90673 was the right one. So I'll hand off to them now.
Good morning, Commission. John Frayne. Just a couple of points. One, I just want to make sure that we clarify that today, the utilities, at least BGE and the PHI utilities, have a number of different time of use rate offerings that we offer to customers. Net energy metering customers can participate in those other offerings. What they are currently not allowed to join is the pilot time of use rate that was done under the PC 44 initiative. They did, as Ms. Sikora explained, they were participants during the pilot, and we actually have still today net energy metered customers who are still on that pilot rate and still able to choose to be on that pilot rate or to choose not to be on that rate if they were somehow didn't want to be on that rate. I think we did see the comments that were filed by the solar companies and understand what they're saying in their comments, but quite frankly, those are solar companies. What we know right now is that there are actually net metered customers who are actually participating in this rate and are still participating in this rate, and we would like to and think it's the right thing to do to open this offering as a choice, as an option for all other net metered customers. To Ms. Sikora's point about the experience that we saw during the pilot for the net energy metered customers, they did actually were able to shift load and did shift load more than the non-net energy metered customers. And I heard Mr. Vanderheyden's comments earlier that with these time periods that we have on this PC 44 time of use rate schedule right now, that the peak period during the winter of 6 to 9 a.m. may not work as well perhaps for a customer with rooftop solar. That may be, and in fact, for some of these customers, I think that probably is the reality, that that specific time period, isn't when their, rooftop solar is generating as much. But the reality is that time period is the peak where we have during the winter on the system, and the purpose of the time of use rates is to send a proper price signal to those customers. And those net energy metered customers are apparently getting the price signal because they actually did shift their load to the extent they could out of that peak period during the pilot. They stay on this time of use rate offering, I think, because they must be winning during the summer when, enough that it makes sense for them to actually continue on this rate. And that's a good thing and a proper thing, I think, for us to do. I'd also just like to make the point that, there was a lot of work done in this PC44 work group looking at this. We actually looked at 5 different options that were out there, that we could think of at least, that were different than the current utility practice. None of them made sense to the work group participants, which is why we came to the consensus regulations following the commission's order. We also looked at what is done in other states and jurisdictions, and we were not able to find any other state or jurisdiction that did anything other than what we are proposing here and would be included in the regulations if you were to approve them. So I understand that Mr. Vanderheyden has put out ideas of other options. I believe that we've evaluated other options, and we have not seen any other states or jurisdictions that are doing anything other than what we're proposing to do in these regulations and what the utilities do today, and what the net energy metered customers who are on the PC4 rate are currently enjoying, and we'd like to just offer that to all other net energy metered customers.
So, any questions for BG&E?
I just want you to, Commissioner Suchman wasn't here when you described the results that you found from the pilot of those who opted, who had solar, who opted for net metering. If you could just repeat that for her benefit.
Yeah. So what we found, during the evaluation of the pilot, there were net energy metered customers who were allowed to be on the pilot rate, and they actually, are still allowed to be on the pilot rate to the extent that they were participants in the pilot. They continue to do that, continue to enjoy the benefits. What we found is that those customers may not actually, be able to win, so to speak, or save as much during the winter because the peak period is 6 to 9 a.m. That's the reality of when the peak is during the winter for the system. The TOU rates are giving the proper price signal to those customers, and we actually were able to find that the net energy metered customers were able to shift their load more than the net energy metered customers during the pilot. I think that we also found that the net energy metered customers were able to save overall on this time of use rate. And so what that I think means, and I can summarize from that, is that they're actually winning more during the summer, able to, the proper price signals are being given so that, the valuation is proper during the summer and the valuation is proper during the winter as well.
Well, it sounds like price signals are working then. Yeah. No, I'm sorry. This is the tail end of this cold, and I just can't get rid of the tickle. But I actually wanted. I'm disappointed that the joint solar people aren't here because they have a proposal that I did want to ask them about. But maybe I can ask you. Since you went through all the other jurisdictions to see what they were doing, and their proposal, I believe, is to try to monetize any excess. Is that so you have a choice? You can monetize it, or you can just roll it over. Is that your sense of what that proposal was?
I think so. I think it's.
I know. I was actually sort of struggling also with trying to understand. So, do you have anything to say about whether you're hearing from your customers that they would like to see their excess is monetized, or do you have an opinion about the value of monetizing?
I think that it's probably overly complicated to do it the way that the solar companies proposed, and quite frankly, we did look at other options over the past year in the PC44 work group, and I think that in terms of what we're hearing from solar customers, I can't say that I personally have heard from solar customers per se, but what I do know is that the solar companies don't necessarily represent solar customers. And the solar customers that we have, there are some that are choosing to be on this PC44 time of use rate schedule and are actually, shifting load and are able to save even on the schedule. And so I think that the right thing to do is to actually open that offering to other net energy metered customers. I think they are sophisticated enough to understand the price signals and to be able to properly know whether it's the right option for them or it's not the right option for them.
Well, and I am troubled that there's a group that proposes something that was also outside the bounds of the consensus proposal, sort of coming in and is not here to explain it and to defend it. So that and since I'm a little confused about what it is that they're actually proposing, and the utilities are confused as well. I mean, I don't know if anybody wants to speak to their proposal and maybe explain it a little bit better, since I'm still not clear about it. I mean, I'm sort of reluctant to try to send back for consideration a proposal that is being offered by a party that's not here and it's not clear. So I don't know if anybody would like to speak to that.
Your Honor, I think I can certainly attempt it. The method that they're proposing, it looks like it's a variation of what staff had proposed by monetizing it. So
it seems very, very different to me. I mean, I understand. I think I'm starting to understand what you're proposing. My sense of what they're proposing is that instead of sort of rolling over the credits, they just want to get cash. That's not your proposal. That seems to be their proposal. But I'm not clear that that is their proposal, and they're not here.
we have two proposals, Your Honor. One would sort of use a monetization approach, and the distinction is that staff suggested just monetize all the production at 18 cents. I think what and our other approach was to just use the kilowatt hours to apply against the other category if there was something left over after you make an initial pass.
And did you offer these when the conversation was going on with the parties, that and in terms of finding a consensus approach?
The discussions in the net metering working group addressing this were left with a need to actually do some modeling to understand what the bill impacts were. So we did not take those proposals to the net metering working group specifically because at that point we did not understand that there was a need to move these regulations at a time that would before we were going to undertake to do those with the net metering. So no, they have not seen those. I guess what I'm saying is we're proposing monetizing at a single rate. I think what the solar folks suggested was to use a monetization approach. So apply the off-peak energy to the off-peak time usage, apply the on-peak energy produced to the on-peak time usage, and that presumably in most cases you're going to have you're going to have energy left over off-peak.
But that's not what I just asked. I mean, I'm still trying to understand why it is that we were presented with a consensus position that wasn't consensus.
But
Did you represent to the group? Go ahead. I agree with what you're proposing, and then you changed your mind?
No, I don't know that I agree with all the characterizations of what has been said. I'll tell you, I didn't want to get into he said, she said today, but here's my experience of what happened. at the end of around August, Brett reached out to me and said, "Hey, we got these regulations. Maybe it was September. We need to have the net metering working group look at those." Of course, we are in the throes of getting our regulations for the permanent program out the door with the deadline that we had to get to. But we took it on and met for 3 meetings. I think 2 in the end of September, 1 in early October. We were not able to fully vet, and we sort of had to shift gears because we were in the middle of something else. But we took the time, met 3 times, and incorporated this on our schedule. Talked about it, looked at it. I think at that time, a lot of the solar folks were not completely plugged into it. They did not fully understand what the matter of it was. I had asked for, can we do some modeling of what this would do to actual customers that are standard time use customer or standard rate customers that are doing net metering? What happens if they do this and shift load? What happens if they don't? Can they shift load? Because I think it seemed clear.
So you said to the group,
The net metering working group.
I'm not ready to sign on to this approach. I want to model this.
That was what I know, at least I asked for in those meetings of the utility folks. And I think we were told that we did not model that in the time of use working group. My communications back to the time of use working group were not in any way formal. I think we conveyed probably with a phone call, and this is myself talking to Brett. It's like, look, we're going to deal with this for community solar in our second rulemaking, but now we've got things on our plate where we got to get the permanent rules out. I did not understand that this was something that had to happen, before our second rulemaking, and so I think it was left, tabled until we had the opportunity to take it up in more detail. When this was filed, I think we were surprised a little bit that the rules got filed, but we understand, the commission put out an order, and then in response to the commission orders in September of 23, this came out, and so said, all right, we guess we have to react to this. And I think that's the first time we had anything formal from the solar folks after they took a look at this. I don't know why they're not here today. I actually kind of thought they would come, and I didn't say, hey, make sure you're there, but I hope they didn't confuse this with something that they can take up at next week's RM56 rulemaking on the community solar program. But so there just was not a technical review with the solar folks in the room, so they understood what this would do to and for their customers. And I don't know how we could not tell you this going forward. I'm sorry if it surprised everyone, but it's a little bit unusual to have an issue kind of flowing back between 2 working groups. Next time something like this happens, we'll make sure we formally indicate what we're going to do, and let everybody understand that we're asking for an opportunity to review it at some time in the future. But we didn't have any expectation that initial contact, which sort of left us with some undetermined technical issues, actually understanding bill impacts is always an important thing to look at when you're trying to figure out if it's going to hit a customer or not. So
right,
I'm
not gonna cast aspersions. It just seems that it wasn't just one group within the working group. It seemed like a number of groups all believed they had consensus, and obviously didn't hear that you wanted to do something more. I mean,
all the parties. I mean, I apologize. I probably should have made sure the staff folks in the in the time of use working group, were a little more vocal about, hey, net metering hasn't looked at this yet. You really shouldn't take this to the commission. I think our folks looked at, the commission set an order saying, hey, we haven't come up with a better result than this. Let's get these regs out and and adopt them. So, obviously some communication should have been happening there, but people's councils in net metering and in time of use. The utilities obviously are in both of those working groups. So, there was communication there. I think maybe folks were saying, look, hey, the commission said go ahead and do this. They've already decided this policy. But clearly the solar folks, from their response in writing to this rulemaking, were not a part of that consensus.
yet they're not here today.
Well,
And that's
that's a,
right.
cardinal sin. A lot of
Well,
times
it's
when
not
you're
just
trying
that it's
to-
a cardinal sin. I mean, I think you heard from other commissioners that this has been around and we're kind of ready to go, and I mean, frankly, Mr. Chair, I really don't understand. I don't see the point of delaying this anymore, and given that the joint solar people aren't here, I personally am ready to just
All right.
go ahead, but.
Well, actually, before we get to that, let me just check a couple other boxes. So, Mr. Seegers, I take it you're okay with what's been said so far on behalf of your company?
We are, Your Honor.
And Potomac Edison, do you have anything other you want to, I mean, do you agree with that, or do you have anything else you want to add?
No, Your Honor, we agree with the excellent companies.
Okay. And just for the record, there isn't anybody in the room who wants to speak on behalf of the solar industry, large or small, correct? Okay, well, all right, so,
Mr. Chairman, you've got some hands up.
oh, wait a minute.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I just wanted to provide a bit more clarification. I know Mr. Vanderheyden, I think everything that he said regarding the collaboration with the between the two work groups is correct, and I just wanted to specify. I know in the March 2023 TOU work group report, it specifically called out that if the determination by the commission is set to go forth and file regulations to basically account for this billing practice, that that work group should be should at least be communicated to, really on the fact that they have the solar expertise. So then, whenever the order was issued, come mid-June, July in 2023, that issue said go forth and TOU work group work out proposed regulations. And then at that time between July and September, the TOU work group worked out the proposed regulations, and then also extended communication over to the net metering work group. I remember I participated in one of the work group calls. I think it was in September, Mr. Vanderheyden, I believe, and basically communicated what was being worked out, what the regulations did. So I did want to clarify that communication aspect between the two work groups, how it has gone back to I guess the summer of last year. So
Okay, that's fine. All right, absent anybody else. So I'm going to move that we publish the following draft revised regulations in accordance with today's proceeding in the Maryland Register for notice and comment, subject to non-substantive changes necessary to conform to COMAR drafting requirements for COMAR 20.50.01.03, COMAR 20.50.10.04, and COMAR 20.50.10.05. And Mr. Baker.
Mr. Chair, Ben Baker, Senior Commission Advisor. Just real quick before you do that, there were two non-substantive edits that weren't conforming, but they were edits to the regs. I don't know if we need to first make those two edits before we adopt.
Well, actually, my understanding is that those types of edits can be done within the rulemaking process. So yeah, so I think we're fine on that. So Commissioner Sushman.
Aye.
Commissioner Barve.
Aye.
Commissioner Richard.
Aye.
I vote aye. So I think we're done